Hey guys, this is VaulSC. Welcome to another Infinity tutorial video. In this one I'm going to be talking about marker state. It's a subsection of the rules, a category of the rules really, that some newer players get a little bit tripped up on, so I want to take the time in this video to talk about what markers are. It's going to be covering camouflage and hiding, a little bit of impersonation and holo-echo and stuff like that, but generally the whole concept of having markers on the battlefield that represent troopers. Just to explain a little bit more about what that is. In this game, just like any other tabletop war games, you can have a whole bunch of really nice miniatures representing your troopers. You can see what they are and where they are. Your opponent can see what they are and where they are. And a lot of other tabletop war games, some troopers may be a bit stealthier or better at evading enemies, so they'll have special rules which relate to making them more difficult to engage with. For example, there might be a negative modifier when your opponent shoots them, or some subtraction to range, that kind of thing. Infinity does have that, but it takes it even one step further than that. You may have a miniature here who is so stealthy and hidden from the opponent that you actually use a marker, little token on the battlefield to represent his position for a period of time until he's discovered. So this means that your opponent doesn't even know what kind of trooper you have underneath there. Maybe it is this guy here that you're going to be placing down on the battlefield, or maybe not. It's a camouflage marker. Perhaps they've got this guy over here. And your opponent just doesn't know that until they have actually discovered the marker, and that's what marker state is all about and what we're going to be covering in this video. Just before we get too far into it as well, I do want to encourage people, if you haven't already, to check out my previous explainer video, which is the real basics of playing the game. We've got orders and how the turn works out, face-to-face rolls. Really important video to watch first if you're new, before getting into this video about marker state, because this is intended as a follow-up video to go along past that. Obviously, the rules in the rulebook will go through marker state and camouflage and all the related things in a lot more detail, so we'll pay to have a careful read of that first before watching the video, or after watching the video, because my explanation is never going to substitute the exact letter of the law and the rules. It's just that being able to see visually some representations and simulations and tutorials might be helpful for some people to get the gist of what's going on and how it actually works, and to help get your head around it. Okay, so just coming back to the rulebook for a sec as we get into this. Camouflage and hiding is basically split up into a bunch of different levels. So you may have Mimetism as the first one. Just coming back to an example I may have given in the previous video. Let's say we've got our trooper over here, which spends a short skill, goes and moves. Maybe there's an ARO from our Dakini TACbot over here. Mimetism is simply a rule which subtracts -3 from your mod to hit. So if this model needed a 13 to hit normally, give or take some range bands and cover, Mimetism is a kind of camouflage and hiding which just simply applies the negative penalty to hit, just like you'd expect to see in a lot of other tabletop war games where it's really about the modifiers. But Mimetism essentially is just this idea that your model is like a chameleon. Can't even reach my own guy here. Your model is basically like a chameleon. It blends into its surroundings. It makes its opponent more difficult to home in on it, and that's really all it is. And that's something we want to sort of understand first before we get into actual camouflage itself. But if we go back into the rulebook again and we find camouflage level 2, and again, lots of different levels of it, camouflage allows you to essentially deploy your trooper on the battlefield as a marker, as we were talking about. So you've got this little piece of cardboard here which comes with a lot of the operation starter sets. The first thing I'll say about these markers is that I really recommend that you get some sort of three-dimensional piece to actually represent the camouflage trooper, rather than this little starter piece of cardboard. And the reason for that is that you might be wanting to put your camouflage marker way back here and you sort of tuck it into the corner, and it might be a bit more difficult for your opponent to see. So instead, what I recommend is three-dimensional markers like this. It's much easier for both players to see. It looks a lot cooler, and you get a much better visual representation of where things are. It's easier to spot for you on the battlefield. So instead of deploying as your trooper, you're deploying as this little marker, and it may have a number on it, because if you have several camouflage markers on the battlefield, you need to be able to tell your opponent later on to verify which ones corresponded to the actual trooper on your army list. So what I do is I have them numbered on the actual pieces, and then I write down the numbers on my army list after it's printed out as to what was what. So you can deploy in marker state at the start of the game as you put your trooper on the battlefield. Note that once your trooper is revealed later on, it can actually spend an order, and this will be a long skill, like an entire order, where it can do nothing else to replace that miniature with the marker, and there it is. Obviously, if it's revealed and then goes back into marker state, your opponent's going to know what it was, but from the outset, as the game starts, your opponent may be guessing as to whether this is a model that has a chain rifle that's just going to go off in your face when you move close to it, or a sniper rifle where if you move past its long line of sight down a long corridor, it's going to snipe at you as you're sort of moving past here, right? So that's one of the advantages and the powers of having a model in marker state. The other thing, of course, is that you can move around without actually being shot at, and this is the really important thing that we're probably going to be spending the time on. So we've got our Dakini TAC bot over here, and as we talked about previously in the last tutorial, maybe I'm going to be spending an order on my camo marker. So here it is, spending the order, and the camo marker does a short skill which brings it out around to here in line of sight of the Dakini TAC bot. When you are up against a marker, the list of different things you can do is changed. So we talked about in the last video how this guy can declare a ARO shoot, automatic reaction auto firing his gun, or to dodge, or to maybe use a piece of equipment, or whatever it may be. It's a different set of options when you're up against the camo marker. So shooting is not actually allowed because it's not revealed yet. You are allowed to attempt to discover it, in which case you look up your willpower stat, you look at the range bands of discover, which is a skill. It's like a ballistic skill attack, really, except it uses your willpower and it has a specific range, so it might be -3 or +3 depending on how far away the enemy model is. As a camo marker, you are always -3 to hit as well, just like we talked about with Mimetism, so camo marker, same sort of thing. And you're basically trying to make a roll to see if that model's discovered, and if you pass it, that's when your opponent is forced to bring out their actual model, right? So that's one thing you can do in response instead of shooting when your enemy camo marker comes out over here. The other thing that you can do, which you couldn't really do before, is to delay. And that's really, really important because you're effectively searching around the corridors, you sense that something's up, but if your opponent fires at you, it's a bit unfair if you weren't able to fire back from the first ARO option, for the first opportunity, I should say. So what sometimes happens in Infinity, in fact quite a lot with marker state, is you'll spend an order on your camo marker over here. It'll move out. This Dakini will declare a delay in response, and then this model over here, turns out it's a Guilang with a sniper rifle perhaps, and that will declare a shoot, and the Dakini is allowed to respond at this point with shooting back or dodging, for example. So note that the structure is really different here when we bring in camo markers. Previously, we talked about a situation where we spend the order on the Zhanchi, spends a short skill to move, Dakini arrows, shoots back, Zhanchi fires back at him, and that's the structure of it. You make your first move, your opponent responds, you make your second move, and it's usually move, they shoot you, you shoot them. Camo markers, again, different because you move, they delay, you shoot, then they shoot. So note that that's actually a little bit different because being able to shoot second means that you get to maybe choose which of the guns you have is best. You may also choose to dodge, knowing that it's a model that has a gun that's much better than you, or a profile that's much better than you, and you're at a disadvantage. So sometimes it can be slightly advantageous to respond to a marker because you get that secondary or that final sort of say on what's going to happen in terms of your response. But usually it is pretty bad to face off against a camo marker because not only are you -3 to hit against its natural ability, -3 for being a camouflage marker, or a model with camouflage, I should say. So even once you're revealed, you're -3 to hit. A model coming out of marker state, so if it started the order as a marker and gets revealed later in that order and then shoots, it can declare a surprise attack where it inflicts yet another -3 on our enemy model over here. So let's talk through this example with the Guilang. I'm spending a short skill with my Guilang. I'm moving out to here. My opponent decides not to discover, because if he did that, I could just shoot him for free. It's very important. We'll probably touch on that a bit more later. So he decides to delay over here, this Dakini TAC-bot. So the Guilang declares a surprise shot over here, and then, game on. So let's pretend actually that this guy has a combi rifle, and this Dakini also has a combi rifle. The Dakini, I believe, is ballistic skill 11, and will be firing at +3 to hit for being in optimal range band within 16 inches. But then will be -3 for camouflage, and then another -3 for surprise attack. So it's pretty bad. The Guilang will be shooting at good range with a combi rifle, so +3 to hit. Normally -3, because this model actually has Mimetism as well. Mimetism, again, it's where you get -3 for enemies to hit you, but you can't use a marker. So that's like a lower level of, evasion, shall we speak. This Guilang also has an ability called Multispectral visor, which is something we'll talk more about in this video, and that negates the -3 penalty. So this Dakini is really in a lot of trouble as a result of the marker state rules. This Guilang really subtracting quite a lot, and it would be even worse if we had, for example, a bit of cover out over here, and the Guilang had simply moved along across the cover, managed to get into line of sight, and shot him from there. That'd be another -3 to hit from the Dakini as well. So you can already see it's quite powerful, and it changes the structure of what you can and can't do during the order, and perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit more. I want to go to Thermo-optical camouflage now, and that's the next level up from camouflage. So you've got Mimetism, then you've got normal camouflage, then you've got Thermo-optical camouflage. When I play, I like to use a different marker for my TO camo troopers. By the way, if you guys didn't already know, Thermo-optical camouflage, I believe, comes from Ghost in the Shell. There's that wonderful scene where the Major drops in across and then bashes through the glass and assassinates a bunch of people, and she's got this very high-tech kind of camouflage where the light sort of bends around her, and it's even more difficult to spot compared to camouflage, whereas camouflage is usually just like people, modern-day warfare where you're sort of hiding in the bushes and your clothes are very similar to the color of the trees kind of thing, whereas Thermo-optical camouflage is a bit more high-tech. You may have even spotted the TO camo marker in the operation starter sets. That's it there. But again, I recommend replacing that with some of these. So many of these online companies now produce various different kind of camo markers. You can even just use a silhouette marker as well. There's a whole bunch of them around. And just as long as your opponent knows what's going on. But I use a different color, so blue for TO camo. Thing about TO camo is that it's like camouflage. It has all the same benefits of camouflage, but it inflicts a -6 for your opponent to shoot you. And when you're trying to discover it, it's -6 to discover. So that makes it really, really bad. I think we've got a suitable TO camo model over here. So once you're revealed, again, unless your opponent has multispectral visor, you're always -6 to hit. And you're still inflicting the surprise attacks, -3 once you come out of camo. But TO camo, Thermo-optical camouflage, has another feature of its rules, and that is the ability to start the game in hidden deployment, which is a really, really kind of interesting thing in Infinity. So normally in tabletop war games, you'll have your models deployed somewhere on the table where your opponent can see it, or in this case with Infinity, maybe as a marker somewhere on the table where, again, your opponent can see it and play around it. But Infinity has this TO camo rule where you're allowed to start your turn in hidden deployment, your game in hidden deployment, and that's where the marker isn't even on the table at all. What you'll do at the start of the game is you'll whip out your cell phone and you'll take a picture of where the model was and then save that for later. Or you'll write down on a piece of paper that it was exactly at the back of the car, for example, and it was prone, for example. Or maybe you'll just draw a little map and you'll be able to verify that way. And that way your opponent will be moving around, and there could be any number of TO camo models out there, which is a really, really powerful kind of thing. And it's very scary for your opponent. Note that when you're playing Infinity, that's one of the reasons why it's good etiquette to wait for your opponent's arrows first. So I'm spending an order on my Dakini TAC bot right now, declaring a short skill, moving down the corridor a little bit, and I'm going to ask my opponent if he or she has any AROs, even if I can't see any models anywhere on the table. And the reason I'll do that is because there's a small chance my opponent may have a hidden deployment trooper that's actually here and is in line of sight of my Dakini. So rather than going, yep, I'm going to move, now nobody can see me, I'm going to move again, I like to take a little pause here where I go, yep, spending the order, doing a short skill, ask my opponent, do you have any arrows? No, you don't. Now I keep moving. And that's because potentially you're spending the order on the Dakini back here, moving up, waiting for arrows, and your opponent goes, right, I'm going to arrow with this model here, this Dazu, and it's going to shoot at you. And this is totally unexpected for the Dakini TAC-bot. Dakini TAC-bot now has the option to dodge or shoot back or do whatever as normal, but it's going to be -3 to hit. Sorry, -6 to hit because of TO camo. Note that we talked about surprise attack, where you inflict an additional -3 for coming out of TO camo state. That's only in the active turn. That's only when the active model is declaring the order that imposes that -3 on top of that. So once again, if this model over here was the one spinning the order, and again, what you can do is you can say, I'm in hidden deployment, I'm going to spend an order on my guy that's actually not on the table right now. The order is going to be spent to start here and move a short way. What do you want to do? Okay, well, the Dakini declares a delay, and then the TO camo model is going to pop out of marker state. We put the real model on the board, and it declares a surprise shot at the Dakini. So this Dakini, -3 to hit because of the surprise shot, I should say. Surprise attacks when you get in close combat. And -6 for TO camo. So you can already see that the modifiers are really stacking up. And this model here, might be at -6 or at -9, depending on what the situation is. You can easily imagine a situation where our TO camo model is from a really long way away, has a sniper rifle, is in cover, is applying surprise attack. What can even happen is your opponent might find themselves at -12 to hit. If this Dakini only has Blister Skill 11, and we're subtracting 12 from what they need to hit because of all of these modifiers, it's actually not even allowed to roll the dice. You can't even pick up the dice and roll because all of your shots automatically miss. So if you're worried that might be the situation, the better choice might even be to dodge. So this is really an illustration of how powerful thermo-optical camouflage can be, and when you start Infinity, you really start to fear it as soon as you've been really trounced by it, so to speak. So we've talked about Mimetism, regular camouflage, thermo-optical camouflage, hidden deployment. I want to take a brief moment to talk about the sensor rules as well. So let's say we've got a model over here, but we wanted to put it in hidden deployment. We take a photo of it first with our camera to get a verification of exactly where it is. So we know right now that there's a model right there, and you guys can see that spot on the table, and our opponent just has no clue that there's a model there. But they may suspect. So you might have a model with the ability sensor. This is a bot over here, which we're going to pretend has the sensor ability, and that bot is going to spend an order over here, and it's going to move over this way. Our opponent has a model in hidden deployment, as we know, somewhere around like here or wherever it was, and they really hoping that they're not going to be discovered and found out later. So what they're going to do is just nothing. But the second short skill from the sensor bot is going to declare a sensor, basically, which means that we get out our measuring ruler, and anything in hidden deployment that was within 8 inches of this bot has to come out of hidden deployment now, and that's one way to try and counter hidden deployment. So it's a dice roll required, but it's a very easy dice roll to make because you take your willpower and you add 6. So with willpower 13, adding 6, you get 19. Any roll except a 20. So a 95% chance really to discover that model, and your opponent is forced to put any hidden deployment models nearby on the table as a trooper, not a marker. So that reveals you. Note that this model could respond by shooting before it gets censored, because it knows the jig is up, and if you see your opponent's about to do that, you can just fire at the bot. But then your troop is revealed, and it then becomes a matter of your opponent finding things that it can attack the TO camo trooper with. So point here is that there are weaknesses. There are some ways to play around troopers like this, and as you learn Infinity, you'll discover various things like fire damage actually does reduce the protection that TO camo has. chain rifles and things like that that automatically hit are going to be quite good against these guys. Obviously sensor, very powerful, and there are going to be some troopers that have multispectral visors which ignore the effects of the modifiers that come with camouflage and hiding. In fact, let's go to talk about that right now. We may have, let's choose a guy over here. So we've got a camouflage marker. We don't know who that is. And it gets revealed and turns out to be this guy over here, guy with camouflage. If that model is attacked by a model with multispectral visor level 1, this guy doesn't get to penalize his opponent with -3 to hit. Note that this is a Zensha and this is a Guilong. Interestingly enough, with these two models, if you look them up in the Yuching rules, the Guilong actually has multispectral visor level 1 and camouflage. So this model is imposing a -3 to hit on this guy, but this guy can't impose his -3 to hit on this guy, even though they both have camouflage, because he's got a multispectral visor, a piece of equipment which allows him to scan the battlefield, maybe sort of infrared sight or whatever it may be, just to locate enemy troopers other than normal optics, right? So that's a level 1 MSV. It subtracts it basically ignores the -3 penalty from enemy troopers that have Mimetism, so that would have worked on our Dakini attack bot as well. If this was actually that Dakini attack bot we talked about earlier, the MSV1 ignores the -3 for Mimetism. You guys will see that as you go through the rules. However, if we're up against that Dazyu we talked about earlier who has Thermo-optical camouflage, this model imposes a -6 to hit on this model. And this guy only ignores the -3s. However, what MSV1 will do, Multispectral Visor Level 1 will do, is will simply downgrade that -6 to a -3. So it's basically subtracting, it's basically getting around 3 units, if we can call it that way, of concealment, if I can put it that way. So anybody who's normally -3 to hit will be nothing. And anybody who's -6 to hit will be -3. I'm pretty sure you guys will be able to get around that. There is one more, actually no, there's a couple more things to say about that. You may have a model with MSV2. I don't have something on hand, but let's pretend that this was actually a model with MSV2. That means that it obviously ignores any Mimetism and camouflage penalties, but it will also completely ignore the level, the higher level camouflage, the TO camouflage, if you have Multispectral Visor level 2. And as you read through the Multispectral Visor rules in the rulebook, that'll become a lot clearer. But then there's MSV3, and we'll just briefly talk about that because we've got our Asura over here, this beautiful Yuching miniature. So if the Asura is up against a model that has Mimetism, it completely ignores Mimetism. If it's up against a model with camouflage, it'll ignore that -3 to hit. If it's a model that has Thermo-optical camouflage, that's -6, it'll ignore that as well. But on top of that, the thing about a Multispectral Visor 3 model is that if it's coming into line of sight of an enemy camo marker or an enemy Thermo-optical camouflage marker, it discovers them automatically. Normally what you'd have to do, even if you had a MSV1 trooper like this, if you're discovering, and if they're not revealing their marker, you've got to make a roll to actually turn them into a trooper and force your opponent to bring their model onto the battlefield. Normally you have to make a roll, and although it would be -3 or -6 depending on the gear they have, and your gear over here, your visor may get around that. If you have a model with MSV3, it's allowed to simply discover automatically. So let's say we've got our Asura, we spend one order on him, or her I should say, over here, spending the order to walk around here in line of sight of both of these two markers. The opponent can respond by shooting back or just doing nothing, which is a valid thing to do if you're hoping your opponent won't discover you. So the Asura can then keep moving if she wants. She can't shoot the markers because they haven't been discovered yet, but what she may do with her second short skill is simply to declare a discover. Let's say we're trying to discover this orange one. Okay, it turned out to be a Guilong. Your opponent's forced to place that because MSV3 allows you to discover things automatically if you're spending the short skill. The other thing that is beneficial with MSV3 is that your opponent may be in the middle of their turn. So they've got a camo marker over here. They spend an order on their camo marker. They move out over here. All right. And the Asura is going to delay. It could discover automatically, but then it will get shot because your opponent gets another short skill after that during that order. So the Asura will delay. We have a Guilang now, which is going to shoot a combi rifle, for example, and it's going to do that with surprise attack. So normally an enemy model would be -3 to hit because of the camouflage, and another -3 to hit because of surprise shot. But the Asura also ignores the surprise shot because of MSV3. So 2 advantages of MSV3. One of them is being able to discover troopers automatically without requiring a roll, and the other one is ignoring the penalties of surprise shot. Again, the normal penalties from camouflage, the -3 to hits and all of that, that's a different kind of modifier from surprise attack, because surprise attack is not normally negated by visors and equipment like that. Only MSV3 is able to negate that. So again, hopefully I haven't gone through that too quickly. This tutorial will hopefully help you when you're reading through the rules and sort of seeing the actual wording of that for yourself. The next thing I want to talk about is equipment that may be camouflaged, and the notorious thing about that is mines. So let's say we've got camo markers, which I've labeled 1 and 5, and there's a couple of them. Okay? And what we're going to be doing is moving out with, I don't know, Dakini TacBot over here. So spinning the order on the Dakini TacBot. The thing about camouflage markers, and another reason why that closed information, that unknown element is so important, is that a camo marker may represent a trooper. You don't know what version of that trooper it will be, because you can choose a guy that has a combi rifle, sniper rifle, or chain rifle, or whatever it may be, and your opponent may have some idea of what kind of trooper it is, but not what loadout it has. But not only that, a camouflage marker might even be actually concealing a piece of equipment. So in reality, we may have had a Guilang with combi rifle here, and we may actually have a mine over here which is being concealed by that camouflage marker, which is a pretty big deal, isn't it? Because you move out around here and suddenly a mine detonates, and you're thinking, gosh, now I have to dodge. It's actually -3 to dodge mines, so that's even harder. This Dakini's having a really bad day because he's also got a rule called, remote. He's a remote robot, basically, so he's even further subtracted to actually dodge. And because we were expecting a trooper that might have shot back and we could have a face-to-face roll against it, now we're actually having to dodge, otherwise we get hit by the mine. Even worse, let's say the Dakini came in line of sight of both of these camo markers here, and the mine detonates, and the Guilang declares a shot. So that's terrible, because the Dakini TacBot, if it dodges, is not going to have a chance to shoot back at the Guilang, even though it's the Dakini's active turn. Normally you have the advantage in the active turn because you can roll more dice. But he's trying to save his life here, so he's trying to dodge. Mine goes off, probably will hit him anyway, force an armor save, and the Guilang gets a shot as well. Or the Guilang may actually, as a response, lay a new mine, which actually is camouflaged again. So you put another camo marker down on the table. So this mine detonates, goes away. Let's say this guy does dodge. Now if he activates again, the same thing's going to happen. A new mine's going to suddenly appear, and the Guilang can shoot back or lay another mine. So you've got to be really careful against camouflage markers, especially ones which are quite close together. A couple of tips with that, though, and this may be helpful for people new to this kind of thing, is that if you're seeing a couple of markers which are quite close to each other, that may be a clue, a tip, that one of them has the mine layer ability, the other one actually is a mine, because they have to start within 8 inches of each other. So familiarize yourself with this range, because if you're seeing a lot of camo markers bunched up, chances are some of them may be mines, and that may be a reason to tread a bit more carefully. So that's that. And of course there may be different kinds of mines out there as well, so always be reading the rules and getting familiar with what your opponent can and can't have in their lists. Sometimes it's good to send in a bit of a throwaway trooper that is maybe good at dodging, or you don't care if you lose it if you suspect there are going to be mines there. Next up, let's just spend a little bit of time talking about tactics and making good use of this very powerful ability. I want to come back now to an example I was sort of discussing a bit earlier, and that's where you've got a model that's already in marker state, and you spend the order moving it. Your opponent, again, has a differing set of reactions compared to what they normally have. This Dakini TacBot over here is allowed to dodge, it can delay, or it can maybe use some sort of piece of equipment or reset. But if it does declare a delay and you move again with your camera marker, say it down to here, or maybe across the corridor this way, then the Dakini actually loses its ability to ARO, and that's the penalty for delaying. And that can be a very powerful way of getting around the battlefield unnoticed with your camera marker and not attack. Because remember, you can't fire at the camera marker at all. So let's look at that again. Camera marker's over here, out of line of sight. Spins the order, first short skill over to here. Dakini declares a delay. And then we declare another short skill move over to here. And this is pretty cool because we're still in the marker state. We haven't been discovered. And this allows us to get to a part of the battlefield that we're trying to get to later. Maybe there was an objective over this side, somewhere around back here, that we wanted to press a button on some sort of console, and to get there we had to avoid any enemy attention, and using the marker state to get over there was a very powerful way of doing that. So our opponent might be thinking we're up to that and may declare a discover instead, which would reveal this model, meaning it has to go back into camo state later. That's actually really terrible, because if they do that, the Guilan can actually appear here and shoot at the Dakini for free. So if we had our marker moving out like this, spend the first short skill, we move over here, Dakini declares a discover, we declare a shot with the Guilan. It's not a face-to-face roll because the discover is meaningless now. It's wasted because the model's come onto the table anyway. It has allowed itself to be discovered voluntarily, but not only that, it's now shooting for free. So we pick up 3 dice out of our bag, roll them all. They're all normal rolls. It's +3 to hit because we're in range with the combi rifle. This guy has Multispectral visor 1, so he'll ignore the Mimetism of the Dakini. So he's going to be hitting on 14s over here, I think it is, or 15s, depending on the ballistic skill. And this Dakini is in a world of trouble. As you start to play games of Infinity and see this kind of thing happening, you become sort of a bit scared into always delaying when your opponent starts doing this. So always be mindful of the fact that because you've basically created a trap for your opponent as you're moving out, forcing them to always hold their action, always delay wherever possible, or they'll get shot. Your camera marker is free to simply move around the battlefield however it wants. And that can be really, really strong. Here's another way you could take advantage of that. Again, we've got our Dakini hanging out around here. And note that I've drawn, hopefully you can see this in the video, I know that the focus is not great, but there's the back of the base, which is painted black, and the front of the base, which is painted white, which shows that this guy has a facing, which is somewhere around there, which means that back here it actually can't see enemy models, but on the front it can see enemy models. Now we have a Thermo-optical camouflage marker hidden around this corner. Spending an order on it, he's going to move a couple of inches out to here and a couple of inches down to here. And the Dakini TAC bot, worried that this might be some enemy model with a powerful gun, is going to delay. So we keep moving over to this spot here, right? We're very close right now. Then spinning another order out of the order pool, again on this camo marker, he may decide to move around here. Again, the Dakini is sort of trapped. If he goes for a dodge, he'll get shot. If he goes for a discover, he'll get shot. If he does nothing, our camo marker can keep moving, and we'll move over here safely. Note that if the camo marker reveals at this point, if I move into the back arc of the Dakini and then shoot, it will be revealed, for the entire order. And that's something I probably haven't really covered in this video, and I suppose should. Is that, let's say if you start here as a camo marker, spend the order, move out of line of sight, then your opponent delays, then you shoot from this point, you're considered to be revealed for the entire order. So again, as you work through the actual text of the rules, that'll become a little bit more clearer and explicit. But just bear in mind that you can't get away with moving your camo marker somewhere else where they can't see you and then shoot from the position you started at and get a free shot. It doesn't quite work like that. But let's come back to the situation over here. We start at this point, spend the order there. We move it around into the back arc of that Dakini. He just declares that is a delay, because otherwise we shoot him from back here. And then our camo marker simply just stops and does nothing. All right? Then we spend a third order, and we've now maneuvered into the back half of the Dakini, where the Dakini can't even shoot us. So we might declare an idle. This model decides to delay again, and then we shoot him straight in the back. So it might be this guy over here, the ninja. This will give us a free shot with a bow and arrow straight into the back of the Dakini, and the Dakini is going to be -3 for dodging because it's a remote. It's not very good at dodging. Another -3 for surprise shot for the ninja coming out of a Thermo-optical camouflage marker state. So this guy's going to be dodging at -6, whereas the ninja, +3 to hit from short range from the bow, technically -3 from the Mimetism, but the Dakini's in real trouble. Even worse, what we may do is, with the marker over here, spend an order on him in the back arc and move into base contact. Now the rules say that if you have a camo marker of some kind that moves into base contact with an enemy model, you have to reveal it. But that's fine, because that's what we wanted anyway. The ninja moves in, whips out her sword, and attacks the Dakini. And this is terrible for the Dakini, because Dakini may be wanting to make a close combat attack or dodge, but whatever he's going to be doing, the ninja has a huge close combat stat. On top of that, she's got level 3 martial arts, which gives her +3 to hit, -3 to the Dakini again, on top of those penalties. If the Dakini makes a close combat attack, the camouflage is ignored, so you don't take the negative modifiers for camouflage when you're attacking them in close combat. That's not how it works. But if you start the order on marker state, and you come into base contact with an enemy, and you make a close combat attack against them, you can make a surprise attack, which is similar to surprise shot. Surprise shot is where you would move out with your marker and then shoot at them and impose a -3 as you're coming out of marker state. But when you move into their base contact and you make an attack with your close combat weapon, it's -6 on top of that. So it's pretty horrendous. Let's say we attacked from the front, which we probably should have done anyway. That's a lot simpler. Spend an order on the marker, so it starts as a marker over here, moves into base contact like this. Dakini declares a shot back with a combi rifle. So Dakini +3 to hit from short range, -6 for Tio Camo, -6 for surprise attack. So +3, but -12. The accounting gets done and we get the abacus out, and it turns out to be -9. So the chances of dealing with this kind of attack are really, really, really low. And that's one of the ways in Infinity that you can take advantage of being a marker to really shift the odds in your favor and absolutely destroy things very reliably. So that's how that works. There are a lot of different examples I can give. You may have a model way back with a camouflage, with a combi rifle or a sniper rifle at good range band, able to surprise models when they're least expecting it. You may have models like our Dazio over here, which actually has some hacking abilities, which I can go through in another video, surprising your opponent with hacking. You also apply the -3 for surprise attack, surprise shot when you reveal and hack an enemy model with your hacker. So there are a lot of little ways to leverage these advantages. Let me just talk briefly about defending against camo marker players, because as a new player, this can be quite daunting when your opponent's using these camo models and you're not. So again, if your opponent moves out with a marker and you're worried about it, if you're in doubt about what to do, I would say that it's usually best to simply delay if you're a new player, because again, there are few ways that your opponent can take advantage of that. If they get a free move, so be it. That's probably something they're going to get away with anyway. And if you delay, you have the chance to shoot back at them if they shoot back at you. And the most common thing that happens in Infinity anyway with these markers is that the enemy moves, it tends to shoot you anyway. I mean, if they're planning on actually, let's say the enemy started here, if they move deliberately to line of sight and wait for your response and you delay, chances are they're probably trying to set up a shot anyway because they know they're going to have surprise shot. So it's best to just delay and let them have it, and that's usually what routinely happens. We replace their model with their marker with a model, and life goes on. Right? Another thing you can do if your trooper happens to be very inexpensive and not very important to you is that you can just declare a lot of discovers if you know for sure that your opponent is trying to get to a different part of the battlefield to have an effect. So If we again have this Dazu moving out in TO camo state over to here, and you know your opponent is going to try and get to a location further down there where it needs to press a button or engage other troopers, you can be really annoying by declaring a delay here if you know that your opponent isn't planning on revealing just yet. Because if they keep moving, you attempt to discover and you may pull it off. Here's another thing you can do as well. Let's say you've got a couple of Dakini attack bots, and they're just hanging out, and your opponent again is moving out with their marker. What you can attempt to do if you really want to is declare a discover with one of them and a delay with the other one. And that means that if your opponent shoots, you'll at least get to shoot back with one of them. And if your opponent keeps moving, you'll at least get to discover with one of them. So that's how that works. What it can be a good idea sometimes to do is use your least important and least relevant models, and the models that are going to die anyway in a fight, to do the discovering, and your models that may have a good ability to attack back with to do the delaying and the shooting. Let's pretend that this guy over here had a chain rifle which hits automatically, and the camo marker moves out over here. And we discover with this guy who's at long range, and this guy who's just sitting there waiting to spring the trap. If this model keeps moving, it may get discovered, but if it shoots, this model can declare a direct template attack where he fires a flamethrower or a chain rifle just across here, and that's going to hit this guy automatically without having to worry about all of the negative modifiers. So that can be something you can set up. You may also have mines placed around. Again, a mine is in the form of a camouflage marker, but again, doesn't matter how powerful the TO camo trooper is. If it's moving around over here and comes in line of sight of the mine detonates even against enemy markers. So that may be another way to punish troopers using a lot of these camo markers and really relying on them in their lists, is to have a lot of mines and deployable equipment that it can actually detonate despite your opponent being in a marker state, because that will automatically reveal it. Another thing you can do is intuitive attacks. So you might have a guy who has a chain colt, that's a direct template weapon, and we're up against a Dazu which is in mark state over here. So we spend our order on our Canram, who moves out into the corridor, and the TO camo trooper decides to do nothing, and maybe we attempt to discover with our Canram, and that fails because we're -6 because it's a TO camo trooper. It might be difficult to pass that. So we spend a new order on the Canram, and it's going to clear a long skill, and it's going to do an intuitive attack with his chain colt, and that allows you to target a marker with your weapon, so long as it has the intuitive attack ability or trait on you. You can look up the weapon profile and it will tell you. Things like flamethrowers, chain rifles, chain colts, that kind of thing, nanopulses have the ability to do this, and that allows you to try and pass a willpower check to actually damage this model directly, even though it's in marker state. So the Dazu player has a couple of choices here. It can just declare nothing, hoping that that intuitive attack will fail. This guy's probably got, what, a 60-65% chance, can't remember what it is, with the attack to actually hit and force an armor save. Or if the Dazu responds by dodging or shooting back, well, that's a minor victory for you already, because you've forced that player to reveal their trooper. But secondarily, it now becomes a face-to-face roll, so you work out your willpower for this trooper, then you work out what this trooper needs to hit or to dodge when it goes into the face-to-face roll, and it becomes, a dice-off, your dice compared to that dice like we talked about in the previous video. Note that normally when you fire a direct template weapon, it's just a matter of whether your opponent dodges or not, and then it hits. Or if your opponent's not going face-to-face, not going to try and contest you, it hits automatically. This is the one time where direct template weapons, if you look at them up in the rules for flamethrowers, chain rifles, that kind of thing, nanopulses, this is the one situation where it is a face-to-face roll, where you have your trooper with the direct template weapon against the enemy marker who's popping out of marker state to respond to you. That's where it is a bit of a face-off. So markers are very powerful, but there are ways around them. Deployable equipment, there may be things you can discover. Again, sensors as well, able to reveal a marker. We talked about the sensor revealing hidden deployment. The sensor also works for other things as well. So if we move our trooper out with a sensor, these camo markers decide not to reveal themselves. The sensor, using its second short skill, basically goes, right, I'm going to declare a sensor as a second short skill. Anything within 8 inches whether it's a marker or something in hidden deployment, is revealed. So we pass our dice roll because we didn't roll like a 20, and that will reveal a ninja over here. Your opponent has to put that model on the field. It's going to reveal, I don't know, this Dao right over here. And let's say our opponent has a ninja as well, but the ninja was in hidden deployment. So the ninja is basically forced to reveal. I actually lost my ninja marker. So let's say that this is it's already out in the battlefield. So let's say the camouflage markers were the Guilang and the Dao Fei, but our opponent was actually sneaky and had a hidden deployment ninja over here as well. That Yu Ching player is forced to reveal their troopers. Not that ninjas work for... Actually, no, they do. Ninjas still work for Yu Ching. So your opponent's forced to reveal even their hidden deployment troopers. So that can make sense of really, really powerful. There are pieces of equipment in the game called sniffers as well, where your opponent may have actually laid down an object on the ground where you move out, and the sensor is applied not just from the sensor bot itself, the remote. It's applied from this point as well, which will further extend your ability to discover things. So we've talked about how powerful camo markers can be because of the way they change the structure of AROs and the orders, but also the modifiers and the ways in which you can really outmaneuver your opponent and gain a lot of advantages. But there are also a lot of things which directly affect markers and reveal them, and basically turn models which pay a lot of extra points for having marker state into models that are, no more effective than others when we get into that sort of situation, that sort of position. I want to briefly talk about how impersonation works now, because this is another kind of marker that you'll encounter in the rules. You may have seen these little impersonation markers when you open your copy of Operation Wildfire or whatever it may be. An impersonation marker is an enemy model representing their trooper, who you don't have any information about just yet. This is counting as... basically one of your own troopers. So you imagine this Dao Fei is patrolling the corridors and he's looking for enemies. What this is representing is a friendly Yu Ching model that isn't actually a friendly Yu Ching model. So maybe I'll get out a little red marker over here so you can see it a bit more clearly. I'm allowed to spend a short skill or an order on my impersonation marker and move it somewhere. And my opponent can delay, they can discover, they can dodge, but they can't attack it because we're treating this as though the Dao Fei model here currently believes that this red marker is a friendly Yu Ching trooper, so it's counted as a friendly trooper. On top of that, somehow, mines can't even determine that. So somehow there's a program in place where the mine is programmed to represent, troopers that have a Yu Ching insignia or, some sort of code that they wear on their wristband. I didn't even know what we're going to say here, but no matter what, you can't attack a model that's impersonating one of your friends. What you can do is attempt to discover it. And discovering an impersonated marker is really difficult because it's -6. There is a piece of equipment in the game called biometric visor, which helps to reduce that because you've got a special, visor that allows you to sort of maybe see through clothes or whatever you can. But the impersonation marker is then flipped over if you're discovered down to a further level of impersonation. So you can't even discover it with one attempt. But after you go down a level with impersonation, there are no more negative modifiers to discover it. And then after you discover it a second time, it's revealed. So once it's revealed, it may turn out to be something like a horrible specular killer, which is an alien which is really good at transmogrifying itself, transforming itself into a Yu Ching model or something like that. And the same sort of tactics apply. You may move your impersonation marker down the corridor. Your opponent decides to delay, otherwise it'll get shot. If it does just to discover, the specular could just whip out a boarding shotgun right now and blast it. All right, so we're not going to do that. We're spinning in order to move down the corridor again. We've got to go for a delay. We keep moving around the back arc. We come into close combat, or maybe we'll just jump straight in there with the speculo and attack. And that is really, really powerful. The main difference between camouflage markers and impersonation markers is that with impersonation, you don't apply any negative mods once you've been discovered. Once they can see you, that's that. There's no more modifiers that can be applied. But getting an enemy trooper out of impersonation state is even more difficult than it is to get them out of marker state when they're just a camouflage marker or a TO camo marker, because the mods are a bit more, are usually pretty bad. But also, you've got to discover them twice, which is awful. Once your opponent shoots you, though, it doesn't matter what state of impersonation they were in, they'll automatically just come out of that state. But the powerful thing about it is they can control and pick their fights and work out who they're going to attack and who they're going to assassinate. So bear that in mind. Even a sensor won't reveal an impersonation marker, mind you. There are very few things you can do. To counter these guys, though, it's usually about out-deploying them, even though an impersonation marker is so powerful because it can deploy anywhere on the battlefield, even in your deployment zone if it passes a roll. Otherwise, it has to be set back to your deployment zone. But usually it's good to try and spread your troopers out. Use the reserve rule in Infinity, where you deploy your entire army first, then you deploy another model after they've deployed their troopers. Hopefully they'll have to place down their impersonation marker before you put your sensitive model, like your lieutenant or something else, out there. But the ability to walk across the battlefield and be treated like a friendly trooper for your opponent is extremely powerful. And do have a careful read through the rules if you play a faction like Combined Army, Shazvasti, Hakislam, factions like that, which can take impersonators because they are very, very, very strong. I think I just wanted to talk about holo-projectors at Lucky Last. So holo-projection, again, uses marker state, but there are a few key differences. Let's again say that we have our Dakini TACbot over here, and our opponent has a Zanshi behind this wall, and we're going to spend an order to perform a short skill, moving out around here. The Dakini, again, has the option of, well, it can't delay because it's a trooper. You can only delay against markers. So it could shoot, it could dodge, it could lay a mine. If it has mines, it could reset. Just whatever it would normally be allowed to do. Now, our Zanshi may continue moving, that's fine. Or the Zanshi may shoot. But it may turn out that we're using a rule called Holo-projector level 1 to disguise another model in our list, this Canren, as another trooper. And this is one really cool thing about Infinity, is that if you have access to this particular rule, you're allowed to write down a secondary army list which showed that you had, say, a Zanshi in it, whereas you don't even have a Zanshi, you've actually got this Canren instead. And only at the point where this model is going to be actually making dice rolls or taking hits or being discovered in some way, do you have to replace the real model with the fake one. And that can mean your opponent makes the wrong decision sometimes. Your opponent may declare a shot back at you where really it would have been better off dodging, because we're actually dealing with a model that has a chain colt now, which hits automatically. Or if I just move and my opponent goes for a dodge and I keep moving, my opponent may not have realized that this is a model which is capable of, completing an objective, whereas he would have been better off trying to shoot me as a last-ditch attempt to put me down, that kind of thing. So again, as you're reading through the rules of Holo-projector level 1, you can find some really creative ways to trick your opponent into thinking that you have a model that's less threatening or more threatening than it really is. Also, making your opponent think that there are certain capabilities you have you don't, or disguising the fact you have capabilities there that you really do. There's a second level to holo-projection, though. You could be a holo-projection level 2, and that's where you're not being disguised as somebody else, or maybe you are. But the thing about this level of holo-projection is that you are accompanied by a couple of other markers as well. And what we're trying to say here is that all three of these markers are trying to represent a holo-projection where your opponent's got to figure out which one's the real one. So 2 out of 3 of these models, and it may be this guy, it may be this guy, maybe this guy, are actually fakes. And you'll write that down on a piece of paper somewhere or record it somehow. But the key is that as you spend your short skill, all of the holo-projections get to move. So we spend our regular order, and we move out here, and we can go into different spots with these guys. Let's just put them somewhere that the camera can see them. Note that they have to stay within range of each other, so they all have to be at least less than 8 inches away from other markers that are also the holo-projectors. And our Dakini TACbot over here can respond if any of these markers come within line of sight. So if we had one way back here and only these two, the Dakini gets to dodge back maybe through this portal here, or shoot at one of them, or delay. Let's say the Dakini decides to shoot. So the Canren pulls out around here, and it's got a couple of holo echoes next to it. If the Dakini picks one, let's say the Dakini picks this model and shoots it and hits it, we have to remove that because he's just shot at thin air. It was just a hologram. And then the Canren can shoot him for free over here. And that means that this gains a huge advantage because he's firing back at the Dakini. Dakini isn't even shooting the right target and completely misses. So that's how holo projection can potentially be really powerful. But one reason why it sometimes suffers a little bit as a rule is that when the Canren does move out around here, and there are a couple of holo echoes, the Dakini is allowed to delay. And that means that if you then shoot, and it turns out to be a marker number 1, which was the real Canren, and you shoot with that guy, the Dakini does get to fire back at him. However, there is -3 to hit, because you still count that surprise shot we were talking about earlier, where if you start the turn as a marker, whether it's Impersonation, or TO Camo, or Camouflage, or Holo Echo, if you're starting as that marker, then shooting them, you're penalizing them with -3. So having these Holo Echoes come around here was very helpful. The more useful way to play Holo Echoes, though, is in a defensive way, where you may have them scattered around the table, and your opponent might not know which one's the real one, and they're going after them and trying to sort of fire at them, and you're basically declaring no response, and your opponent may waste a little bit of time. And orders are very precious in this game. They may waste time trying to shoot or discover a particular Holo Echo that's not really the real one, and that can be very powerful as well. Not only that, but you're allowed to combine the two skills, where the Canren may pretend to be a Zhanshi, and there may be another Holo Echo over here, and another Holo Echo over here, and all three of them are Zhanshis, and your opponent may be fooled into thinking that you actually have three separate Zhanshis on the battlefield, when in fact you only have one Canren. That can be quite powerful, although more experienced players tend to look at that and realize that most armulists don't really do that, so something's up, something fishy is going on. Also, you can show up with your Canren model, and you can play it a little bit more tricky, where you have the Holo Echo, so you're really not really hiding anything, but you're pretending to be a different kind of Canren. So he may be pretending to have a different kind of loadout. So you might be pretending to be a forward observer Canren with a boarding shotgun, whereas really you're actually an assault hacker. So this guy over here feels like he might be safe against hacking, and suddenly we reveal the real Canren, and he declares a hacking attack when this model wasn't expecting it. Those are some of the things that you can do with holo projection. Alrighty, so hopefully that has given you guys a little bit of a visual representation of how you use markers and some of the nuances of it. It really is just scratching the surface. What I recommend you do after watching this video, if you haven't already, again, make sure you've watched my tutorial video about how orders are structured, but have a look through the camouflage marker rules. Obviously, when you go into the rule book, there's the section from page 70, I think it is, in the PDF, where you're going through all of the camouflage marker state rules and looking at all the examples. When you're just reading text, it's sometimes a bit hard to get your head around, but having a video like this can be useful going through that. Elsewhere in the PDF, you'll find the rules for holo-projectors and impersonation, although I think you may need to look up the PDF for human sphere, possibly, for some of those rules. Can't quite remember. There is one version of camouflage which I may have forgotten to cover off, and that is ambush camouflage and limited camouflage, things like that. What you may find is that there's a model that has 2 camouflage markers, and one of them is real, so once it's discovered, you replace it with the real model that it may be, maybe a Spetsnaz or a Mentor from Shazvasti. And once it's revealed, the other one is actually just a fake. It's a duplicate, just taken off the battlefield. That can trick some opponents into worrying that you have a mine, or that the real model's over here or over here. If it's your lieutenant, it may help to hide it, to conceal it further. So that's a brief look at ambush camouflage. There is also limited camouflage as well, where you've got a Guilang, for example. It starts the game, if you want it to, in marker state. After you shoot something with it, you replace it with a real model. But it's allowed to spend a a long skill, like an entire order, to go back into marker state, which can be very powerful, because if you're wanting to inflict new penalties on your opponent later or not be shot at immediately, going back into marker states are really good. You can't do that while you're in line of sight of enemy models. You can't do it when you're too close to a sensor, but you are allowed to do that in other situations. Limited camouflage though, some models have that, for example a Liberto or Major Luna, where once you've come out of marker state you can't go back in there again, and that's a limitation of that level, that kind of camouflage, mind you, so that is a pretty big deal. One last quick thought about that as well. Let's say we've got our Guilang, and it declares a long skill, so we spend the order on it. We're going to spend a long skill going back into camo marker state, so we're going to get out our marker, but our opponent goes, aha! In ARO response, my ARO is to declare a shot with my hidden deployment model, which was actually here. So the Guilang can't even do this, it's forced to declare an idle instead, it gets shot at for free, and this is another way that hidden deployment can be really, really nasty. Actually, I just then I thought of another thing which can be really strong as well. You might have your Zhanshi, which moves down through to here, and thinking that there's no enemy models, declares a second short skill to keep moving. And in the second short skill, our Dazyu reveals and shoots at him. And because it's the second part of the order, because the Zhanshi's already given up both of his opportunities to do things, that shot is for free, which means that depending on the positioning of the hidden deployment trooper, you could be in a lot more trouble. Note that if the Zhanshi starts here, moves out, the Dazyu appears, it shoots, the Zhanshi can shoot back. But again, if it was poorly timed, moves out over here, nothing happens, moves out over here, gets shot for free. That kind of dynamic can really make you think about the positions in Infinity and corridors and things like that, and experienced players may stop short before coming around a corner and start a whole fresh new order before moving past a particular line of sight where a hidden deployment might potentially be shooting at them from. So you start to learn little tricks like this as you play through the game, and you see some real life examples of marker state and rules which pertain to that and that sort of category. Hopefully this has been helpful, and I hope that this makes it easier for you guys to sort of pick little things up and understand what's written in the rulebook, and you know, benefit really when you're playing games, rather than having to learn the hard way and just get beaten down again and again and again before you figure out how to take advantage of these things. But for now, this has been VaulSC. Hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.